Welcome back to the Industry 4.0 and Sustainable Supply Chain stage. We are delighted that you have returned or perhaps just joined us. Hopefully you have headed over to the CogX Festival app for some networking and for the dedicated Q&A. This is all about how we get the next 10 years right. And now I am delighted to introduce the next session, which is Sustainable Futures. If you track it, you can improve it. How the Internet of Things offers hope in the climate crisis. And to do that, I am delighted to welcome David Pugh and his team to the stage. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion. So we'll be discussing how advanced digital technologies drive the UK's net zero ambitions and how we can embed sustainable practices into business. And to join me today, we have Ángela from TWI.
Hello, David.
And Simon from Arup joining today.
Hello.
And just to kick us off, would you be able to just give a 2 minutes overview of who you are, the organisations that you represent, and how your companies are looking at sustainability and why you joined us today? We'll start with you.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Ángela.
Yes, my name is Ángela Angulo. I'm representing here my dual role as the director of the Renewable Energy Innovation Centre with Bedfordshire University and my innovation consultancy manager role at TWI. My background is in industrial and electrical engineering and structural integrity, which is what I've been basically doing at TWI for the last 7 years. This is highly related with the topic of today because it's using sensors, data, and software to ensure the suitability of assets, engineering assets, to perform their right function. So yeah, this is me.
Great, and so I'm Simon Evans. I'm the digital energy leader from Arup, which means I look after how we can use advanced digital technologies to enhance our engineering design, delivery and operations, particularly in the energy sector. So my background, I'm a chartered engineer and a technology developer with a background in the heavy industries, which is things like oil and gas. And I've got a particular passion for how we can use the transformational applications of digital engineering, and in particular, the concept of a digital twin in society and in industry. So further to that, I'm a fellow of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, really actively involved in the institution. And the final thing I'll say is that I'm the delivery team lead for the Centre for Digital World Britain and their National Digital Twin Programme, which is a programme, if you've heard of it, that's creating the language and framework to create an ecosystem of connected digital twins for the entire UK. In terms of sustainability, so for Arup, it's a core part of our offering and one of the key pillars of our strategy and our ambition to shape a better world.
Brilliant, thanks both. And my name is David Pugh. I'm the Manufacturing Partnerships Lead at the Digital Catapult. So my job is to sit between industry and advanced digital technologies and ensure that advanced digital technologies are used responsibly and safely to ensure sustainability, optimization and improvement in industry today. So to start off our panel, one of the last things that Theresa May did as Prime Minister was ingrain some important targets to produce net zero emissions by 2050. Now, this is a long way away. It's 30 years away. But why is it important for organisations to start acting now to achieve these goals? And I'd like to start with you, Simon, on that one.
So it's a great question. And I think the key part of this is that in order to achieve 2050 goals, you have to really start today, because it's not something you can click your fingers and just do overnight. There has to be a plan, has to be ramped up slowly, there has to be the right market incentives. So for organizations such as ourselves and such as industry, it's imperative that we make the choices today that will put us on the roadmap to get to that destination in 2050. And be that you put aside the right investment or you make the right decisions around future works you're going to do. I think it's a core part that we really have to consider.
And how?
I think it is important that we start working on it now, and I'm aware that there are many business and companies, universities that are looking at this already. So we have been working on developing new models of collaboration in the last few years, but maybe more than 10 years. But the interest of first universities that they have shown in renewable areas, in decarbonization, in sustainability has increased a lot, especially in the last 6 months to a year. We have launched 3 different innovation centers between TWI and different universities in UK. One in renewable energy, another one decarbonizing industry, another one in circular economy, which is another aspect as well. And the last one was actually between Digital Catapult and TWI, which is a Cambridge-based industrial NetZero innovation center, aiming to support business and companies to get there to reach that horizon in 2050 that all the players are trying to get, and the sooner we are there, the better, because we have to take the opportunity and we have to make sure that all the players in the supply chain are well represented and are very committed from the beginning to end. And this includes also the academia side, the universities, the research institutes, small companies, medium, large, any organization, because sharing facilities and knowledge is a key to reach that target that we have.
Absolutely. Sorry, Simon.
I was going to also say, I think a big part of it as well, isn't it, around the net zero emissions is hugely about the energy transition and what are all organizations and society going to do around that, and how we're going to shift from or away from, let's say, the dirtier fuels towards the clean fuels. I know some of that, particularly if we look at things like migrating to hydrogen, for example, a huge amount of effort and work has to be put in place between now and needing to do that implemented and effective by 2050.
Absolutely, that's a key factor in the success of our net zero transition. And it's really great to see, Ángela, that there are lots of different organizations now coming together. We know that sustainability and climate action is not something that one organization could do. Would you just be able to expand on some of the centers you mentioned and the roles that they'll be playing, and what your kind of hopes are for these centers and how they will be able to kind of drive innovation in this area?
Yeah. Well, the aim is that every center will have their own scope, and we are there to support research, of course, but also companies that are part of these partnerships. So we like to say is collaborate to innovate. In this case, is innovate to accelerate as well, to progress companies to reach certain levels. We have to make sure that from the very beginning, all the developments are designed with a view to the future in terms of design and materials and reuse of materials as well. So what we try through the innovation consultancy is to help to link people and to help companies to realize how important it is for them to be alert now, to be able to be ready for the future. So what we like doing as well is getting them to work together. There are different areas in digital technologies. We have to make sure we are able to measure impact and to, after defining the roles of each player, but all of them should be there together to be able to achieve that goal. Then in terms of the model of collaboration, really is we are some sort of a hub where different companies can come together, and if we are able to distribute them through the right channels, it can be the recycling and circular economy, it can be the decarbonizing, net zero, any specific area that those companies, small, medium, large, can go through. We will be there to help them to achieve those and to provide guidance, because some universities maybe very academic sometimes. Some other bodies like Digital Catapult are there also performing a similar function to link people to be aware of the market. And then from TWI, we come with the more industrial side to understand what are the problems of our members in any industry, in oil and gas, in transport, because this is something global really that applies to others. And we have to make sure that all the chain is linked together.
That's fantastic. It's really fantastic to see. So this panel, we'll be talking about IoT, and one of the most interesting technologies that IoT underpins is a digital twin. There's lots of potential here for how these can really change the way we do business, but also how we can achieve sustainability. And so to start, Simon, would you be able to just explain to us what a digital twin is?
Now that's the $1 million question, isn't it? So it's a great one because, yeah, digital twins, they mean many things to many people. I think most people probably see them as a product or a technology that you can just buy off the shelf and implement. But I think it's probably more helpful to us to consider it as a methodology and a way of working. And what I mean by that is if you look at the definition of a digital twin, and there's many across industry, but the one I'll go back to is the one that's put out there by the Centre for Digital Britain, who are of course leading on the National Digital Twin Programme, which I'll explain in a second. And that is really that a digital twin is some type of digital representation of an asset, a process or system within the built or natural environment at a level of detail or accuracy proportionate to what you're trying to achieve and to the use cases defined by it. Now, what that means really is that you have some type of digital or physical asset, let's say, then you have some type of digital representation of that asset. Now, the important part being the connection between the physical and digital, data flowing from physical to digital, where insights and decisions can be made. And then those decisions allow you to make interventions, if you will, back into the physical environment. And that connection, often seen as needing something like IoT, is actually just any type of connection that connects the physical and digital worlds together. So that's the kind of broader definition. Most people see it as a product that you'd kind of get off the shelf. But what I mean by considering it as a methodology, it's really about considering full life cycle information and data management across the entire asset. And how if you have that information in play from the beginning of when the asset was created all the way through to decommissioning, you can allow all these things everyone talks about to be achieved from the back of it. So that's the kind of the starting piece. But the thing I'll add on top of that is, of course, most of us, when we talk about digital twins, think they're new, particularly in the built environment, and which is many of the attendees of this event. But in reality, they've been around since probably about the 1960s. The earliest example being the Apollo 13 missions, where they called it digital mirroring at the time, and then into the oil and gas and manufacturing and oil and gas industries, probably somewhere in the last decade or so, and find the built environment. But the final thing I'll say that's really exciting is that, of course, a digital twin is great in isolation. You know, everyone loves that. But when it really gets exciting is when you start connecting multiple digital twins together into an ecosystem. And that ecosystem allows the communication of information between multiple twins, between multiple asset owners, and therefore the aggregated benefits that can be achieved from that is vastly greater. And that, of course, is the aspiration of the National Digital Twin Programme, to create that language and infrastructure to enable that.
That's really fascinating. Thank you so much. So I'd like to talk a bit more about the methodologies and principles behind the digital twin and how these can impact sustainability. And obviously, this isn't a new technology, but we're maybe seeing it more and more in new environments and in new industries. So how can industry use these methodologies and principles to impact sustainability? We'll start with you, Simon, and then go to Ángela.
Of course. So I think you're right there that we're seeing an emergence of this primarily because of storage and compute, and of course connectivity has meant you can bring the physical and the digital worlds closer together. Now, how I like kind of conceptualizing a twin and then leading on to talking about how it can impact sustainability is that it's kind of this roof of a house, if you will, that is an all-encompassing kind of concept, and the walls of the house that support the roof are technologies such as AR, VR, IoT, BIM or information management. Some are important, like cornerstones, you need them, others are optional, but they all fit into this roof of a digital twin. Now, what that means is that by having this information and data management throughout the life cycle, the principles of what we refer to as a digital twin approach, it arguably allows you to make better decisions that are data driven. So you can understand the asset greater because you have more information about it, but you can also understand and simulate what if questions against your assets. So you have, let's say, a city. You can, if you have, let's say, this fully established twin, which is connected between the physical and the digital, it allows you to ask the asset a question: what if I did this or that? How would this change that parameter? And then allow you to make decisions that you can then enact and make effects back into your physical world. So why that's important is, on the drive for sustainability, there's a huge amount of information and a huge amount of data associated with it, a huge amount of things we need to consider, and we don't necessarily know how one situational scenario will affect a given course or how it will impact other items in the system. So by combining them all together into this kind of broader ecosystem or systems of thinking approach, it allows you intrinsically to have much more knowledge and informed decisions, as I say, when you go about it.
That's really fascinating. And Ángela, how can some of the methodologies and principles that you've experienced in digital twins impact sustainability, and how can they be used to improve how we work in our daily lives?
Well, I have been looking at the digital twin technology for some years now, because this closely links to the approach of predictive maintenance, which is really something that I've been doing, looking at extending life of assets. And there are three major points, which are reduce power consumption and improve the use of resources and increase efficiency, and also increase the life cycle of any asset or product, and so on. But the main aim of predictive maintenance as a tool is really to reduce a failure, to improve the availability of resources as they should work, and to be able to prevent, to then take the right actions before further damage happens. So this is a bit what I mentioned at the beginning, the structural integrity side that brings data from different sensor sources. It can be structural, it can be operational in terms of temperature. Any sensing feedback is really an input for us to be able to identify how something is performing. I may be a bit biased towards the engineering side and big assets, but it can really be any others linking to smart cities, to day-to-day life usage. Basically, that's it.
That's really cool. And so we've spoken a little bit about how networks of digital twins can enable a digital system that is a network of networks. And what are some of the challenges in doing that, as well as the benefits? So obviously there's a bit of difficulty getting organizations to share data, but if you're able to overcome those steps, what can really be achieved?
A huge amount is I guess the answer, isn't it? If we compare that to, let's say, a mobile phone or computer, having a single mobile phone might be exciting, or a single computer, it might be exciting, you can do a lot of stuff on it. But when you start connecting multiple computers together into a network, and similarly to phones together so you can communicate between multiple parties, the actual benefits that come from it to society are massive. Of course, I'm kind of grossly oversimplifying how the phone system and the internet works in that statement. But in essence, if you look at how you might want to do that for connecting assets together, both in a localized context within one asset owner, so their portfolio, or also across a wider area or for an entire country, the benefits that can come from it are of that aggregated nature. So you often see when you hear people refer to the National Digital Twin Programme, it's often cited that it's very similar in importance, or as important for society, should I say, as similar conversations that were happening 30 years ago or so when Tim Berners-Lee and his team standardized the internet, and of course the social and economic ramifications that came from that. So for me, I think the really interesting thing is exactly as Ángela just said then, that when you connect these assets together and you can start to communicate and understand what each one's doing with each other, how they interact with each other, and what that means at a kind of a micro but also a macro level, it allows you to, of course, strive towards achieving such things as our ambitions of net zero by 2050.
Absolutely. And Ángela, I know you've done lots of work in this sector, and as I mentioned earlier, we've had some of the first digital twins were things like spacecraft and oil and gas. But what are some of the new applications of digital twins? How are they being utilized in kind of emerging industries, and how are they able to adopt these to benefit sustainability?
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to work in a project developing a digital twin for wind turbines. So the fact there is that coming from a purely engineering side, traditional sensing devices that move into connectivity, data transmission and management, if we use all that information together with a simulation of the assets generally, being able to do predictions and life estimation using decision support tools, we would be able to get a much complete solution. So merging real-time data and simulations we have developed intelligent solutions to first know how that asset, in this case a wind turbine, is operating at all the time, at any time during its life, but also to predict how it will behave in a certain period of time. But most importantly, it links a bit with what was just mentioned, is that if we are able to interconnect, let's say, a wind farm with different wind turbines, we will have more data, and we will also be able to predict failure in similar conditions. So if there is an asset that fails because of a given reason, it may be that we expect failure in consecutive assets at some point. So really, this is a powerful tool to ensure that we use the energy efficiently, and that we are able to generate as much as we can with the lowest impact to the economical side, and also the generation of CO2. Because really all the tools that we are implementing are there to somehow remove the human interaction, because sometimes these are difficult to access locations, and for operators or inspectors to get to the place in particular, lots of things have to be moved around, and in transport and time. So that all has a negative impact in the operation and in the efficiency of the management of those fields or farms or whatever we are monitoring in this case. And it's a great tool to be able to remove some of these uncertainties.
I think offshore wind is a really interesting space for it as well, of course, because we saw that market's really been created over the last decade or so and become much more affluent and buoyant, and a big part of our energy mix, if you will. And when it comes to an industry being so young as well, relatively young compared to the rest of the energy sector, it really creates an opportunity for us to do a lot more with the information and data associated with it. Because what we see in, let's say, oil and gas or nuclear is, if you wanted to do anything intelligent and understand an asset's criticality or asset's change through time, let's say its status or its health or condition, you'd need to have some kind of reflection on its historic information, which in more established parts of the generating spectrum, we don't have that information available, or we don't have the sensors. And going back to, I guess, part of this topic on IoT, we don't have that level of information available for the asset. Whereas if we look at offshore wind, we know that they are heavily censored, particularly from the OEMs who make the turbines themselves, and they are monitoring every asset of it. And just through a software update alone, they can really rapidly or increase by a couple of percentage points the generating capacity of a farm, which is fascinating. So it just shows that this kind of feedback loop of monitor, understand how that impacts the design life of the foundation itself, which is what Arup are doing a lot of work in, and then justify the extension of that life, but also then understand how in reality this is functioning, and therefore adapt and tweak the asset so it can respond better to generate more, to get more, especially in a green energy context, is a really fascinating way of using this technology.
Absolutely, and we've mentioned there as well how you could have a fleet of wind turbines that can connect to a connected ecosystem. But what other examples of connected ecosystems are out there that are utilizing this technology?
I guess one of the cruder examples might be, or the simpler examples, is something like Citymapper or Google Maps, where if you look at that, actually the amount of data sets that aggregates is quite substantial, and the consumer experience that you get as an individual is great. You can navigate from A to B via C really seamlessly, but into the hood, the amount of information that's connecting up, be it bus from DFL if you're in London, or cellular data and people's movements, to allow that to be done is kind of maybe a low-level example of this connected ecosystem. But the intent, I think, is key. Is often when we talk about digital twin, a lot of people will probably spit and be like, oh, I hate that concept, that word. It's such a platitude or buzzword. And I think that's quite right, because most people probably focus on the unicorn of what a twin can achieve. This fully autonomous asset that's, can do everything itself, which is absolutely fantastic, like you'd see on Minority Report or something. But in reality, no one can just jump to that straight away. It's a journey, not just a destination. And that journey is about incremental steps of value, of proving a use case, proving the benefit that can come from it, and then moving on to the next step. And I think that's a really important thing that we've kind of touched on here, but to really iterate that we shouldn't talk about twins in industry as this aspiration, as that unicorn, because that's unhelpful. That clouds the water. We should instead be focusing on that first use case, improving it. And more importantly, really looking at, I'd probably use the term here, collaborating on the rules, but competing on the game. Now, what I mean by that is even the definition of a twin, if I Googled that, there'd probably be 1,500 or N+1 definitions. Each one says the same word in a slightly different order because everyone wants to put their own spin on it, which is fantastic, but actually that's unhelpful. That's not achieving any benefit to society or the economy, or even helping us achieve net zero at all. So what we should do instead is collaborate on the rules, by which I mean agree on some of the common terms, but then compete on the game as our own companies and how we can benefit and our USPs individually.
No, that's really fascinating, and it's definitely a good point that when you go to trade shows, well, back when we could go to trade shows, we'd see kind of huge banners on digital twins, and we'd see kind of this is what the future looks like. But actually, it doesn't have to be that complicated. You can make really positive steps just by taking the data you have and starting to work with that and understand how it's beneficial. And so I have we mentioned wind turbines, and that's obviously a very interesting area, and it's one that's kind of grown over the past decade. And as we've seen this kind of influx of new technologies, not just digital twins, but we've seen AI, we've seen IoT, we've seen lots of different technologies that are building into this. But what would be your advice to someone who is looking at this for the first time and saying, I've got some industrial assets. I want to start collecting this data to extend the life of my assets to be more sustainable. What would be your advice to them?
I think it links a bit with what Simon was just mentioning. Some people may be a bit scared or skeptic of the digital twin world because it's so big and broad that it's difficult to lock. So there are lots of steps in between that can be taken. First, we talk about many different words that are fancy. We have Industry 4.0, we have machine learning, AI, digital twin. There are lots of things happening around, but we have to be able to tailor each one for specific industry asset or development. So it is important to start with the instrumentation, the appropriate instrumentation of the asset. And something that has been mentioned before by Simon as well, I think, is that we ideally should be looking at historical data because that's very valuable information that we would have to start developing models. But if that's not the case, we have a new asset, let's say, we have to design it accordingly to the requirements of a future operation, let's say. So having sensors that are placed smartly and that are able to transmit the information that is required, it's very important. So that would be the first step on the way. Then the way data is transmitted, it's something very important to take into account initially. I remember discussing with Digital Catapult once about what's the best let's say data transmission tool or data protocol, and there is not really a single one. It will depend on each specific customer or company. Some of these assets are in difficult to access areas offshore or in explosive environments like many of the oil and gas ones. So that's let's say the next link between the physical sensors and the digital world that we want to complete. So selecting the right transmission protocol is important. Then the key here is how to use data, because there are two sides of the story here. Sometimes for us developing models, we don't have access to proper data information because that's at times a bit restrictive for other organizations. At the same time, big companies with lots of sensors, data and information don't know what to do with it. So there are big databases sitting there waiting for someone to use it. And the final aim of this is not just to gather data for the sake of it, is to be able to have the right information to filter whatever is not necessary and to extract those parameters which will be given as details to improve the performance of the assets and to increase the life, to also feed into the inspection protocols, to define what is the maintenance strategy of a company. So that's really what we want to see at the end. One simple single tool that operators can use to predict their operations, to be able to improve the way they manage the asset, and not only lots of data and information that is flying around. So that's I guess our work at the end of the day, to be able to condense that and to provide the input that each specific company would like to see.
That's really interesting. And people often have talked for the last 10 years about how data is the new oil. And of course, oil isn't really useful until you do something with it. And it's the same with data. You can produce tons of data, but until you actually kind of processed it efficiently and you've applied the correct algorithms and the correct formula to it, it's not something that's really useful. And that's something I always try and get. It's made people quite possessive of data and say, oh, if it's new oil, it must be valuable, therefore it's mine and no one can have it. But you're right, sharing data is as important to actually get that value. And so one thing I want to talk about, as we focused on kind of how we can apply it to existing systems, but if we're developing new systems now, we need to use these approaches to ensure that they're really valuable. And so especially with the work you're doing for the Centre for Digital Built Britain, how people that are building new things now, be that individual assets or new factories or new hospitals, what advice would you give them on how they can use these techniques to really benefit, not just in sustainability, but in all aspects of their operation?
Absolutely. And I think I'd first add on your comment there of data's the new oil. I'll add to that and say maybe it's the new asbestos that we think is fantastic, but in the future we'll realise maybe something else about it. So yeah, to your question on how can what should we do on the new build assets and what should we be considering today? So I think a key part is that obviously the technology horizon is moving very fast. Things are emerging and coming out all the time. And if we are starting a new build project today or instigating a project, we should be considering the concepts of a digital twin approach. And again, I'm using the word approach there intentionally, which is that full life cycle and information management, everything comes from that. Because if we're not doing that, then in essence, we're creating a dumb asset for the future. And that's not really helpful for anyone, because then we'll have to do retrofit and that's expensive. So the key recommendation I'd say for anyone in this space is to consider it today, consider it right now and what you need to do, because we often see that's value engineered out of a program, and that's again unhelpful. But consider at least the basic concepts of what you need to achieve for that first use case, but also have in mind the longer term horizon, that destination of where you want to get to. And secondly, align yourself with industry. It's, as I said before, about collaborate on the rules and compete on the game. It's not helpful for everyone to try and make their own versions of things, because you don't have interoperability. And if we want to get aggregated benefits across society and the economy, we need to have that interoperability between different systems, different data sets, and therefore things like the National Digital Twin Programme, if you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend checking it out, are key to that. And on that particular piece, they have recently released a document called the Pathways document, which details how you go about physically implementing this Internet of Twins, or the twin infrastructure, as it might be referred. So that would be my recommendation. Consider it today, align with industry and collaborate, get out your silos, because in reality, every sector thinks they're special, but in reality, we have the same challenges and same problems we need to address. So work across sector, see how we can bring things from energy, my domain, into water, into the built environment in general.
Absolutely, that's really useful. Thank you for sharing that insight. If people are interested after, that's definitely a report to look up. So we've talked a lot about digital twins and how they can be used to benefit industry and to become more sustainable and to better understand what you're doing. But who are some of the trailblazers in sustainability that we should be following and understanding how they're doing things? And we've mentioned CityMapper, obviously, are using lots of data very well, the wind turbine industry, but are there any companies or specific industries that are really, really taking this seriously and really working hard, not just pledging to become net zero, but working hard to achieve these goals? And Ángela, let's start with you on that. Which industries or companies should we be kind of following the lead of?
Well, it is a bit difficult for me to talk about any company in particular. I will focus attention of those that are talking about digitalization, generally the digitalization of assets, industrial transformation, manufacturing as well, because those are companies that are committing to the future. So big companies will have their own programs to progress and to achieve their targets. Probably it's contradictory to mention the oil and gas sector in this case, but I'm aware that many of the oil and gas companies are now launching programs to reduce the oil consumption in a way, or at least to expand business to other areas, because we know things will change at some point soon. We're looking at 2050, but everybody has to be ready for that, and that's a big expression of interest, I would say, of these big players to be able to expand their portfolio to new disciplines like renewable energy, wind, solar, geothermal in a very heavily dominated oil environment.
Excellent. And Simon, same question.
Yeah, so I think it's again a really interesting question, and I think linking the topic of sustainability to decarbonisation in particular, there are quite a few companies out there and quite a few organisations and sectors that are really taking a drive on this. And for me, my background, of course, being in the energy sector, energy is a big part of the decarbonisation agenda. There's a big emphasis, particularly on some of the less clean fuel types to be, and we know are going to be turned off. And you have parts of energy transition, such as hydrogen, again, which we in Arup do quite a lot of work in, is a key part to that. So I'd say that if we look at the energy spectrum, the energy sector, they are a leading part in this because they have to be by necessity, because a lot of the emissions that we come from that are making us need, well, a lot of our emissions that are leading to us also needing to decarbonise are related to energy in some capacity or transport, let's say. And there's other megas, like I just mentioned there, some of the oil companies. So I know BP, to reference one, has made ambitions to be net zero by 2050. Now that's quite impressive because, of course, BP, known by many of us to be one of the large oil majors, and they're also now leading the way and probably have the capital in some capacity to help drive forward the decarbonisation and sustainability agenda. So as much as we can see ourselves distancing from some of these people, some of these more less clean fuels, some of those organisations are also really, really well positioned to help us achieve these ambitions in the future.
Absolutely. And yeah, decarbonisation is not something we can do in silos. It's something everyone has to do to really achieve. And on that, we've talked about technology, and the technology isn't this catch-all kind of golden egg that will fix this. Technology has its own carbon footprints. So what do you think we can do to minimize these going forward as we integrate data and we build digital twins and we deploy more sensors? How can we minimize the environmental impact that technology has in these sectors?
And that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because was there a couple of years ago when Bitcoin was all the rage and everyone's really excited by it, there was that line around the amount of energy spent globally to mine Bitcoin was like equivalent to the usage of Iceland or something like that. I don't know the exact stat, but it was like a ridiculous amount of energy being used. So you're quite right. Technology, by definition, will be creating some type of environmental impact. But what we're also seeing at the same time is that as technology evolves, it is becoming more energy efficient at the same time. So we can see this, let's say, through a simple one of data centers, we know are very, very energy intensive. So for a long time, what have the providers of energy or data centers been doing? They've been locating them in cold climates, so you don't have to use as much heating. And the same with microprocessors. Of course, we know that they're becoming much more energy efficient. So you have this kind of semi-link where the more of them are appearing, you know, how many IoT devices are getting connected every day is millions. But equally, each of these IoT devices are becoming slightly more energy efficient. So we're both decarbonizing as a nation and introducing more technology, which is increasing our footprint, but this is then more it's more sustainable and has less emissions, so it's also at the same time balancing. So it's kind of like a bit of an act. We need to do more, of course, but I think that's an important consideration to have.
Absolutely. And Ángela, in your work with renewable energy, how is renewable energy being used at things like data centers to improve their efficiency?
Well, the fact is that we have to look at more efficient processes. So there are conventional energies and now looking at, let's say, new materials, new processes, new way of generating electricity are becoming more and more important, because in answer to your previous question, I think we have to look at it from the design stage to select the right processes, the right materials, and that meet the scope really, because not only we need something that is gonna be fit for purpose, that is gonna do the job in a way, we have to make sure that the full cycle is integrated into this sustainability model.
Absolutely, thank you. But those are really interesting things. It's always useful to think about the system as a whole and how using technology is to solve problems, but also to solve those problems that technology then creates is really valuable. So just as obviously we are currently at a point where we're sadly not together, we are working from home, and we're starting to see industries get moving again. We're starting to see the economy hopefully recovering. There's obviously a need to ramp up production quickly, get the economy moving as quickly as possible. But how should industry be working now to ensure that progress that has been made in the last few years isn't lost, and that organisations can enable a green economic recovery and continue the good path that they were going down before COVID hit us? And Simon, we'll start with you.
By collaborating, I'd say, and that's an important part of it, because yeah, absolutely, we're in an interesting space now where we're not able to see each other, and we've seen many studies that have come out in this time that emissions have dropped, I think, in the UK to the lowest level since 2006 or something along those lines. So we have really positive step forwards because of this knee-jerk reaction to, of course, the current situation. And how do we come out that stronger? And how do we not just return back to what we were doing before and increase all our emissions as normal? I think that is a challenge that I don't know if we've fully worked out yet. But one that as industry and as society, we need to collaborate on and make sure that we do make the most of where we've got to. And incidentally, on your systems-based thinking approach, there was an article I read recently from the World Economics Forum that was referring to how the systems of thinking approach being led by organizations, again, such as the National Digital Twin Programme, is key for the economic recovery post-COVID. So it's that systems of systems view, but also collaborating and making sure that we can really come out of this stronger. That's what I'd say.
Fantastic. And Ángela, excuse me, Ángela, what as we go back, how would you say companies should be working to ensure that they're still being sustainable, they're still able to introduce new programs of sustainability as we move forward?
Well, I couldn't agree more with Simon when he's mentioned we should collaborate together, because now we are aware of how some companies are going to struggle to just go through their normal day-to-day activities. That's why we are raising this question, really, how are we going to keep the motivation high? And we have seen many initiatives from the government. I understand the UK Research and Innovation body or defense body will try to support that, to support the new companies to innovate. And to get there. So yeah, we have to make sure that this is not something that stays aside, because there have been quite a few good things coming out of COVID, let's say, and we've seen how contamination levels are as low as ever. The generation of CO2 and others, driving, not needing to do so many things in a way to be more responsible with the environment. We should look at the positives always.
Absolutely. One of the great things about some of the technology spoken about today, it means that people don't have to necessarily be present in as big large numbers in a site. You can be sat in an office somewhere else or at home, observing what's going on and understanding what's going on and being able to bring that in. So we've just got a few minutes left. We will, of course, be back at 1 o'clock for a question and answer session. But I'd like to close off this session by asking what essentially an answer to our first question is, what advice would you be giving to people who are either at the beginning of their sustainability journey within their organizations or looking at how they can become more sustainable? And what advice would you give them, and what sort of approaches would you tell them to take? And Ángela, let's start with you on that one and see what people should be doing.
I think we have demonstrated that everybody in this area, sector, and innovation, especially in Industry 4.0 and digitalisation, has to have a very holistic approach. and then be able to sit and assess the landscape and the business acumen of their investments, because what we have to be able is to guarantee that at the end of this process they will see not only benefits into the environment, but also a return on investment on the companies. So I think it is it is important that people is able to influence people in a way, but more from the side of motivation, and that there is something that is really there, and that we should be looking forward to it.
Really great. And Simon, same question.
I'd say 3 parts really. The first is start now. It's never too late or too early to start, and acknowledge that it's a journey and not a destination. That you have to have the destination in mind, of course, but there are steps of value along the route. The second would be collaborate. It's a problem that we're all facing, so let's work together on it and don't think that, let's say, in isolation we can solve it. And the third, we very much embrace technology, particularly now because COVID-19 in reality has become the first real driver for needing digital transformation. Many people talked about it before, many people wave their hands and say Industry 4.0, but until this happened in the rapid rollout of technology, we never really had that emphasis across all sectors. So really lean on that, embrace technology and take that forward as well. So I'd say start now, collaborate and embrace technology.
Brilliant. And that's a really great way to finish this first session. I'd like to thank both panelists for joining me this afternoon. We will be back at 1 o'clock for a question and answer session. But in the meantime, thank you for your time this afternoon, and hope you've enjoyed this informative discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.